Look, I'm going to tell you something that upsets some people, but it needs saying. Catamarans are everywhere. Charter fleets, marina dream boards, social media, liveaboard fantasies. The pitch is almost impossible to argue with from the sales desk. You get width, stability, cabins that feel like apartments, space for crew, shallow draft, fast passages across calm water. The problem is not that they're bad boats. The problem is they're being sold as the answer to sailing, when they're really the answer to a very specific question. And if that question isn't yours, you're going to spend a lot of money finding that out. So if catamarans are this desirable, if they're everywhere in warm water cruising grounds, why do experienced sailors still treat them like a question mark? Why isn't every serious cruiser buying one? Because the moment you stop imagining a perfect anchorage and start thinking about actual ownership, everything changes. Let me start with something most people have never heard of: bridge deck slamming. A monohull cuts through waves with one hull. A catamaran has two hulls connected by a platform. That gap is brilliant in calm water. In rough conditions, it becomes a problem. When both hulls hit waves at different times, water gets forced into the tunnel between them. If the clearance under the platform isn't high enough, the underside of the bridge deck gets hit. Hard, not splashed. Hit, like someone striking the boat from underneath with a sledgehammer. Every few minutes, all night. The structure is usually fine, but the crew, that's different. You stop sleeping. Your confidence erodes. And on a passage, that matters a lot. Offshore, you're managing people, not just forces. If the boat is constantly being punished, the people on it start to feel like they're on something being attacked by the ocean. Designers try to manage this with bridge deck clearance. The rule is roughly 6% of the boat's length. A 50-footer might have around 37–38 inches. A more serious offshore cat, maybe 55 feet, can push above 42 inches. That difference between tolerable and brutal. But here's where the compromise appears. Buyers want cabins, not tunnels. They want headroom below, interior volume. So some builders start eating into that clearance to create more living space. They add intrusions. They lower cabin soles. They optimize for the marina, not the sea. Suddenly, the slamming gets worse. You buy the boat for its space, and the space actually makes the boat worse in the conditions where you need it to be good. That's the catamaran problem in its simplest form. But it doesn't stop there. The next thing you hit is performance, specifically upwind. This is where the marketing falls apart. Yes, catamarans can be fast. On a reach, absolutely. But speed is directional. Most production cruising catamarans are not optimized for going upwind. Why? Because they're designed for charter, for comfortable living, for shallow draft, for coastal cruising, not for clawing to windward in bad conditions. Most don't have deep keels. They rely on mini keels or fixed foils. When the wind comes forward, the boat doesn't have enough grip. It slides sideways. It makes leeway. A good monohull can point higher and convert more effort into forward progress. A lot of cruising catamarans have to sail lower and accept sideways loss. And that changes everything, because sailors don't judge performance by brochure claims. We judge it by whether the boat actually gets us where we need to go when the weather turns bad. For a lot of production catamarans, that answer is less impressive than people expect. Most of the market is charter grade, and those boats are exactly why traditional sailors still call them motor platforms with sails attached. Then you've got the rig itself. Most catamarans don't use a conventional backstay because it would interfere with the sail shape. Instead, the mast relies on heavily swept spreaders and diamond stays. That works, but it creates a practical problem. On a monohull, you can ease the boom far out on a downwind run. On a catamaran, if you ease the boom too far, the sail presses into those swept spreaders. That's chafe. That's potential damage. So a lot of catamarans can't run dead downwind. They have to sail broader angles and tack downwind instead. Not always a disaster. Sometimes the boat's raw speed makes up for the extra distance. But it's another example of the same pattern. The catamaran's strengths are conditional. Now let's talk about the part that actually stops most people from buying one. Money. A 40 to 44 foot catamaran runs somewhere between $400,000 and $650,000. Move to 45 to 50 feet and $1 million becomes routine. That's before you own it. Once you own it, you discover something every catamaran owner explains to a friend and watches their face change. Everything is doubled. 2 engines, 2 sail drives, 2 rudders, 2 hulls to anti-foul every year. More plumbing, more electrical runs, more systems, more maintenance points. Annual maintenance and systems on a 45-foot cruising catamaran can run between $20,000 and $40,000. Insurance, $6,000 to $18,000. Fuel and consumables, another $5,000 to $10,000. All in, you're looking at somewhere between $40,000 and $70,000 a year. That's not luxury, that's a financial structure. And it gets worse when you try to put the boat somewhere. Marinas were designed for monohulls. A catamaran's beam is one of its biggest selling points at the dock, until you try to dock it. That width that gives you stability and deck space turns into a tax the moment you ask for a slip. Most marinas charge 1.5 to 2 times the normal rate for catamaran dockage. In premium spots, the Caribbean, the Med, anywhere with scarce waterfront, the cost becomes absurd. In some places, long-term catamaran berthing is effectively reserved for owners who are very comfortable spending money. But cost is only part of it. A lot of existing marinas simply cannot fit modern catamarans. The slips are too narrow. The infrastructure was built for boats from 30 years ago, so even if you can pay, you might not have access. That forces you into T-head spaces or anchoring out more often than you planned. Anchoring out sounds romantic until it's your daily logistics. Provisioning runs, getting to shore, weather exposure, dinghy launching in swell. It becomes work. But here's something even less glamorous that tells you a lot about why experienced owners think differently. Haul-outs. Most people don't think about this until something breaks. Then they discover that a huge percentage of travel lifts are built around monohull beam limits. Under 22 feet is common. A standard 40-foot catamaran is already 23 feet wide. A 50-footer is pushing 26, 27 feet. That means a lot of yards simply cannot lift them. Not because they don't want to, because they physically can't. Your service options shrink dramatically. Instead of asking where the nearest yard is, you're asking which yard within a few hundred miles can actually handle the beam. If something breaks in a remote area, you have a real problem. A repair that would be straightforward on a monohull becomes a logistical nightmare. Those specialized facilities exist, and they charge accordingly. Multi-hull blocking alone can add 25% to the cost of a haul-out. Then we get to safety. A catamaran feels incredibly safe until you define what kind of safety you mean. In normal conditions, their stability is genuinely one of their biggest advantages. They don't heel much. That reduces fatigue. It reduces the chance of someone falling. Moving around is easier. For families cruising warm water, that's genuine. But that's primary stability, not ultimate stability. And the difference matters. A monohull gets its safety from ballast low in the keel. As it heels, that ballast creates a righting moment. The boat can be rolled and will want to come back upright. It's designed to self-right. A catamaran works differently. Its stability peaks early, usually around 10 to 12 degrees of heel. After that, if you push it too far, The righting moment drops away. If it inverts, it stays inverted, and it's stable upside down. Modern cruising catamarans do not flip often. Capsize is rare and usually associated with extreme conditions or serious seamanship failures. We're talking about weather over 70, 80, 100 knots. But offshore sailors don't care only about what happens most of the time. We care about what happens when everything goes wrong in the worst possible way. And there, the catamaran asks something a lot of sailors never get comfortable with. If it goes over, it might stay over. Catamaran defenders have a real response: positive buoyancy. A monohull with a heavy keel can sink if the hull is breached badly. A catamaran, because of its construction and watertight compartments, often stays afloat even when badly damaged or inverted. It becomes a platform, a life raft. So the argument isn't simple. It's that catamarans and monohulls offer different safety psychologies. A catamaran gives you stability in everyday life. A monohull gives you self-righting in an extreme event. And a lot of sailors will always prefer the second kind of reassurance. There's also motion. At anchor, catamarans are often better, less rolling, better sleep, that's real. But underway, a monohull tends to roll in a slower, more rhythmic pattern. A catamaran straddling wave systems with two hulls reacts to multiple patterns at once. That can produce jerky, high-frequency motion in chop that some sailors find more nauseating. So the simple idea that catamarans are always more comfortable isn't true. They're often more comfortable in one way and less comfortable in another. Then there's weight. A catamaran's performance depends on staying light. Its speed comes from light displacement. But the boat has enormous storage space, so owners are constantly tempted to load it up. More tools, more spare parts, more fuel, more water, more gear. Unlike a monohull, which can absorb weight increases with less dramatic effect, a catamaran gets punished fast. Add 10% to a catamaran's design weight, and you can lose 10% or more of its speed. That's huge. And it cascades. More weight means the boat sits lower. Lower means reduced bridge deck clearance. Reduced clearance means more slamming. More slamming means more discomfort, more fatigue. So overloading creates a nasty loop. Slower, harsher, less efficient, more engine use, less sailing pleasure. Now there's something even harder to measure: sailing feel. A monohull talks to the sailor. It heels, the helm loads up. The whole boat gives you feedback. You can feel rising pressure. You can sense when it wants a reef. A catamaran often doesn't do that. It sails flat. Many use steering systems with less physical feedback. The boat goes where you point it. It feels stable, composed, almost clinical. For some owners, that's wonderful. For traditional sailors, it can feel unsettling. Because the boat can remain calm and flat while rig loads are quietly building. Instead of talking to you through heel and helm pressure, it just keeps going until you're much closer to the limit than you realize. To a lot of sailors, that feels like sailing with one of your senses removed. Modern production catamarans don't help themselves here. High freeboard, huge saloons, fly bridges. They look more like luxury real estate than seagoing tools. And culture matters. There are sailors who will never buy a catamaran, not because the technical case is weak, but because the symbolism feels wrong. To them, sailing is supposed to involve compromise, sensitivity, seamanship, physical dialogue with the elements. A catamaran can look like an attempt to keep the scenery while deleting too much of the experience. Here's what's interesting, though. The market growth doesn't actually disprove the criticism. It explains it. Catamarans are succeeding in exactly the parts of boating where their strengths matter most. Charter fleets, warm water cruising, coastal hopping, liveaboard life, luxury social sailing. They dominate where people value space, comfort, stability, and easy access to shallow anchorages. They keep struggling in the parts of sailing culture that care most about upwind ability, storm behavior, service access, weight discipline, helm feedback, and what happens when things go wrong. Both sides are seeing something real. Catamaran buyers are not crazy. The boats really are fantastic for specific use cases, and catamaran critics are not just old-fashioned. The compromises really are serious. The industry often sells catamarans as if they're the obvious evolution of sailing, the upgraded version, the better answer. But that's not what they are. They're a different answer. Optimized for comfort, stability, social space, and a certain style of cruising. And when that answer is taken outside its sweet spot, the cracks become obvious. Bridge deck slamming, upwind compromises, rig limitations, double maintenance, beam taxes, haul-out scarcity, capsize psychology, motion issues, weight sensitivity, reduced feedback, cultural resistance. That's why catamarans still aren't universally popular. Not because people don't understand them, but because many sailors understand them perfectly. Catamarans aren't unpopular because they fail. They're unpopular in certain circles because they solve the wrong problems first. They solve the problems people notice at the dock, not always the ones that matter most offshore. They solve how to live on the water beautifully, not always how to handle it when life stops being comfortable. And sailing, real sailing, especially offshore, has always been partly about how a boat behaves when conditions turn rough. That's why the debate never goes away. The catamaran is commercially successful, technically impressive, deeply desirable, and still controversial. Because the closer you get to ownership reality, the more the conversation stops being about luxury and starts being about friction. Real friction. With waves, with wind, with marina pricing, with haul-out infrastructure, with maintenance budgets, with sailing culture itself. That's the catamaran problem. Not that people don't want them, but that too many people want them for the fantasy without understanding what they're actually getting. Until designers fully solve the slamming issue without sacrificing interior volume, until marina and yard infrastructure catches up to wide-beam cruising platforms, and until buyers become more honest about the gap between charter comfort and offshore reality, the catamaran will keep living this double life. A commercial success in the luxury and cruising market, and a controversial compromise among the sailors who take the sport most seriously. If you've owned one of these or spent serious time on one, I'd like to hear where you agree with this and where you don't. Let me know what trade-offs you've actually felt. That's what matters. And if you want more straight sailing talk, subscribe.